All right. Thanks, folks. I appreciate you taking some time out today to join us. We're going to spend a few minutes today just talking about the journey from to Sage Intacct for Construction and how to migrate, some of the steps involved in that, particularly those of you who are coming from Sage 300 Construction and Real Estate, formerly known as Timberline, which I will probably make that verbal faux pas more than once because I still call it Timberline because I go back that far. But we're going to spend some time talking about that today. Um, and when is the right time? When does migration fall in the implementation cycle? And I will contend that it falls in just about every phase. So what I want to do is just kind of highlight, when we go into our lean implementation process, when we roll into doing an implementation for Intacct for one of you guys, we break it out. We got 5 phases here. Then we've got, of course, several milestones underneath these phases. Preparation, evaluation, all that. You can read that. But the point is, data migration sits almost everywhere. It's usually a pretty early conversation, even in the sales cycle. When we're evaluating what your data looks like, we need to understand what what that is. We're going to do test migrations just like we do testing everything else in the software. And then we'll do the live migration. And when we go do the go live, and even post go live, we'll kind of touch on this a little bit further, but there's places where we can take historical data that you don't need right away that we might migrate at a second pass or something like that if that's something that's of interest. So that's something we do here in this is a slight eye chart, so try not to worry about catching it all. But we do talk about here in our first few steps, we talk about internal readiness, getting everything ready. Then we get into starting what we call the training environment. We start talking about data migration, identify the data migration conversion model. Then when we get into this cycle, this is a cycle because it repeats a couple of times as we go through testing and validations and conference room pilot. But we talk about in that same phase, we're designing the data conversions, and then we're actually performing the data conversion when we get over here to the execution side. And again, cyclical thing. We may run through a couple of data conversions, just like we go through a couple of user acceptance testing to make sure we get the results we're looking for. So that's kind of important to understand where that fits in the cycle. And then, as I said, once we get past go live, we'll talk about a little bit when we do that, and some more additional data that might not be critical for go live, but you may want to have it. But I got a couple slides here at the end that talks about some of those options. So we'll go through that a little bit as well. So one of the upfront decisions we sit down and want to talk to you about is, the valuable historical data. What's important? How far back do we go? Most folks that are using Sage 300 have used it some as much as almost 30 years now. Do we really need 30 years worth of data to migrate? So there's the conversation about how far back do we go? Do we just talk about rolling balances forward, minimizing the transaction level conversion and migration? So we'll have those kind of conversations pretty early in the process. So the steps in migration, your data migrations, we'll sit there and design. We'll extract the data from Sage 300. We'll transform it or literally do a data mapping into Intacct. We'll do a pilot migration. We run through a test or multiple tests to make sure it comes over clean, comes over the way you expect it to come over. And then we'll do our live migration. A couple of things to think about when we go through these milestones. Extract, we want to look at this data, declutter. That's my technical term saying we've got a bunch of garbage data out there that we've probably stored for over, like I say, 20, 30 years. We don't need to move everything. We also can take this opportunity to archive. This is when we might use some of the Sage 300 features, archive some of that old data, get it out of our main data folders. If we need to rearrange or do like format changes for some of the key fields, job number, account number, cost code structure, things like that, you may want to do that as well in your source data from Sage 300. And then we're going to transfer. Now, we're working on, we are developing migration tools to assist in this here at Aktion Associates. So we're doing what's called, we'll create what's called, we call a readiness report, which will basically go into your Sage 300 data, kind of give you a nice outline of what it looks like, how old it is, how far back, how many different transactions you have, to look for things that are potential errors, things that might be things that we want to look at, what look like duplicate vendors, duplicate customers, things like that. We'll do that kind of readiness report to kind of help scope out exactly what this is going to look like, because that's one of the biggest challenges we have, is understanding exactly what you have, how far back we're going to go, as I mentioned earlier, and then understand what the whole scope of the data migration can be. Because we can go as far back or as detailed as we need. It's just a matter of what's the value to you for this data. Then we'll take your data from Sage 300 and we will migrate that to a Microsoft SQL database. This is a field for field, table by table mapping that we've created to facilitate the migration. At this point, this is where we'll define what the data mapping is going to be. So if you don't do a key change and you want to change things like your job structure, your job ID, the format, things like that, we can do that here. We're going to, again, do a quality check. We're going to reconcile to make sure the data got converted cleanly, accurately, etc. And then we'll do a test migration. And again, you see where I've got circular arrows in the middle of this screen. That means we might do this a couple of times with your team to understand what it all looks like. And oh, by the way, we forgot this, we missed this. This is something that you do something uniquely. Those are things that we can check for pretty cleanly and look and try and fix before we get into our live migration. Again, you see I've got reconcile in there at least 3 times. So we're going to, again, reconcile, 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 just to make sure your data is exactly what you started with. Numbers are transferring over successfully. And then the final step is to do the live migration into your Sage Intacct instance. So some of the challenges that we get to deal with when we go through a migration. Your Sage 300 data, it's not static. I say static, but it's really not, because you're still live, you're still working and using that. So it's a matter of identifying when we want to migrate. Do we freeze your data? Do we actually migrate as of 12/31, for example, and then we do a second migration when we, maybe 2 months later, once we get everything, all the training done, and then bring additional data over in a second pass. Those are all options that we have available to us, so we can do things like that. So we want to identify when we're doing that. And the second one is dirty data. Again, as I mentioned earlier, most of you guys know that Sage 300 database, being a pervasive SQL, it's still kind of a uniquely designed pervasive SQL, so trying to clean up that data can be challenging. But again, once we put it into the transitional Microsoft SQL database, we can do some things there. And then that's where we'll identify those data mappings, field translations, things like that. As I mentioned earlier, talking about what to convert. Do we convert active jobs, all jobs? How do we bring estimates and change orders over? Do we bring over all the detailed transactions? Do we bring over portions of it? Do we bring over a balance and then leave transactions for remaining, like a partially completed change order, for example, or a commitment? Open payables, receivables, again, do we bring all that transaction detail over or not? And then at the bottom, historical data. This is something we can certainly do at a second phase, But we also have another option for that as well that I'll mention here in a minute. And then again, reconcile. We want to make sure that everything's correct so that when you're moving forward in the new platform under Intacct, your data is accurate. So looking at it from kind of the module or content, things that we've got going now that we can convert as receivables, your customers, open invoices and retainages, job costs, again, of course, all your jobs, whether they're in-progress jobs or completed jobs, the commitments with balances, your estimates or your budgets, open contracts, customer contracts with balances, change orders, and then the appropriate cost transactions that go with that. Again, same thing with payables, the vendors, open AP, things like that. And then, of course, your general ledger, your chart of accounts, your detailed transactions behind that. What is in our phase 2 of our data migration tool set is not out yet is the payroll side of it, the employee masters, times, etc., fringe deductions. Mainly because Sage Intacct Construction payroll was just released last month, so we're still building that tool set out to work with that. So anyway, so basically one advantage that Sage has offered all of our customers is to they will offer you or provide you with a perpetual license of all the modules you have for Sage 300, which allows you to, can keep that on a server that you have on premise, or you can move it to a public or private cloud if you'd like to do something like that. So it enables you to continue to have access to your historical data using Sage 300. Option 2 is, again, utilize the staging SQL database that we create in our data migration tool, where you can use any kind of business intelligence tool to access that legacy data for reporting. What's nice, we have some BI tools that will allow us to access multiple data sources. So we could actually use that SQL staging data for your historical data, bring that into a dashboard, but at the same time, that same dashboard could access your Intacct data, so you could actually have historical current data all on a single dashboard in a URL. So we have some tools that make it available to do things like that as well. So that's kind of, I don't have a huge slide deck to show. I thought we'd maybe open up for questions. This is a good time for that. We're here to help on this journey. This is what we do. That's our purpose in life, is to help folks implement, migrate, and then use the software to your best ability efficiently as you can. So I'm going to stop there for a second. Got a couple more slides just talking about Aktion Associates, but we'll kind of open up the lines, if you will, to any questions that folks might have.
So again, if you do have a question, please put it in the chat and I'll go ahead and read it, or Steve can see it as well.
If I open up that window, I probably can.
Anyone have any questions? Quiet group.
Quiet group. Oh, here we go.
Timeline. Is there a typical timeline for migration from phase 1 to phase 5?
That timeline could be anything. We like to kind of, make it as quickly as possible, but we'll try and walk that with your entire implementation, so they kind of run in parallel. That could be anywhere from 90 days, could be 6 months. It could be even longer. Just depends on how complex your organization is, how much data you have. That kind of rolls into the whole implementation strategy as well. To, depending on, again, we got multiple offices or single offices, things like that. So, we can do that as, in as short as 90 days, but I want to make sure we have enough time to do it right. Question, the SQL tool, is this the Antera tool? No, it is not the Antera tool. It is a tool that Aktion Associates has developed using, we have a staff of software engineers and network engineers that have the ability to do that. So that is answer to that one. Migration tools for TimberScan or Sage Paperless. TimberScan does have some migration tools when you migrate from Sage 300 TimberScan to TimberScan's Titanium for Intacct. They do have migration tools. We allow them to perform that migration. So again, something to work into the plan and make sure that we're doing, again, test migrations with them as well to make sure everything comes over cleanly. Same thing with Sage Paperless. Remotely, or do we send somebody to your office? We can do both. Amazingly, we've been able to, post-COVID, even before COVID, but post-COVID, we've actually done just a tremendous amount of work with customers on a remote basis. Takes away some of that personal touch, but we can certainly do either or, whichever is the most efficient. We'll send people on premise on your site, or we can do that remote. And a lot of times we do a little combination of both. All right.
Anybody else?
Any other questions? I'm making sure I see stuff in the chat, and then I make sure they're not in the Q&A. Okay. All right. Well, think of it for a minute. If you've got other questions, you can post them here. What I want to do is just touch a little bit about Aktion Associates, our background. We're not your typical Sage value-added reseller. We have multiple divisions in our company. We're fairly large. We actually, here's a couple of awards and badges and trophies and things like we get. But more importantly, we have a complete infrastructure and software engineering teams on our that are employees, not necessarily outsourced. So we do provide managed care, infrastructure, cloud provide. We provide private cloud hosting for a lot of Timberline and Sage 100 customers. We do have 2 physical data centers that are located here in the United States. And again, we have software engineers that we do. We've done lots of integration work and things like that. So we've been able to do things within Sage 300 and 100 as well. All right. So that's just a little background about us. One question that did come in, how about the Timberline / Sage 300 ecosystem of apps that accompany often things like HH2, Antera, TimberScan, et cetera? Do they all migrate over with this transition? Many of those products already are integrated with Intacct and have migration tools available. HH2 for time capturing certainly works with Intacct. Antera does as well, that I'm aware of. TimberScan, as I mentioned earlier, certainly. So those are, if you were using some of those independent software vendors, ISVs, to use the acronym, we'll definitely need to build that into the implementation plan and the data migration plan so that we not only catch all of your Sage 300 data, but we get all the ancillary data associated with those products. SFO, for example, is another one to think about. Is there a time frame for eliminating Sage 300? Boy, we have heard a ton of false information on that from a lot of people. Sage committed to maintaining and enhancing Sage 300 for 8 to 10 years. And that's probably, from my personal perspective, that's probably a minimum, because it's, there are a lot of customers using Sage 300. It's not going to go away anytime soon. Everybody will have ample time to migrate to Sage Intacct, when they're ready, and do it at a pace that you're comfortable with. So that's certainly something that's not going to go away anytime soon. Some of us old timers remember when when Timberline came out in the early 90s, Timberline had a DOS product that migrated to the Windows product. And as late as the early 2000s, they still had customers using DOS product and were migrating to the Windows product. So it takes a while for people to move. It's a big customer base. And it's a big deal. You think about the terms of migrating from DOS to Windows back a few decades ago. Same concept. We're migrating to a new platform, a different platform called the cloud. And that's just, kind of the progress of technology. Does Intacct have SSO? It does. They call it Sage Field Operations. They've kind of renamed it, but they do have a SFO component. Where can we see a demo of Sage Intacct? Reach out to us. We'll get you connected with your sales rep. We have some videos available out on YouTube. Plus, they can certainly do a one-on-one presentation with you on Sage Intacct. If you haven't seen it yet, it really it's a fantastic product. I'm really excited about it. How long has Intacct been alive? Actually, Intacct was acquired by Sage, if I remember, in 2017. Intacct's been around almost 20 years. They started as a startup company, like I say, about 20 years ago. Their first product landed about 11 or 12 years ago as a horizontal accounting platform. That was where they started, and then they were building out all the verticals. And Sage started about 3 or 4 years ago, building out the construction vertical on the Intacct platform. So it was released into the construction space about 2 years ago in its early adopter form, and it has been enhanced since then. And it's certainly, Sage Intacct has quarterly releases. It is a true cloud platform, so you don't get to do anything or need to do anything. It just happens. They have very tight controls so that the releases come across clean and don't break stuff. Again, my technical lingo there. So it's a very solid platform. Let's see. Link to all Sage partners that have migration plans on Intacct. I'm not sure what that question is. Status of the payroll module in Intacct. It was released in general availability in February. It has been an early adopter for about a year or longer. There's about 100 customers that have gone through early adoption. It is out. There are still some reporting gaps that are being covered and addressed by Sage now. And it'll probably be out in the next 2 or 3 months. It does work with Atrix for tax filings. That was another question. Yes, and the other option, if you've been listening to Intacct, they do have an ADP integration option as well. So if you need to outsource your payroll and you have some complex construction unions or certified pays, things like that, ADP does also works with Sage Intacct. Sage Estimating. Sage Estimating does work with Intacct. It does integrate natively. It's not an export-import. It does have a connection straight in, much like the connection you're used to seeing with Sage 300. PrintBoss. PrintBoss is still out there. PrintBoss is still just a basic micro check printing tool. I do believe Intacct has some of those micro tools built into it as well. So you may not need PrintBoss. That one I don't remember for sure. Okay. So some people were asking, some of you folks are asking about which third parties or ISVs that work with Sage 300 will work with Sage Intacct. You can reach out to your sales rep. We can certainly get you that list. You can also go out to the Sage Marketplace, Sage Intacct Marketplace. That can be overwhelming because there's a few hundred-ish partners on that marketplace. Not all of them work with the construction vertical, so be careful as you look through that, and certainly reach out to our sales team. Your sales reps can certainly do that. It does have a micro native to Intacct. Greg Kersey, thank you. Can certainly handle that, so you don't need a print boss. So it can handle micro check printing without that add-on. All right, any other questions? Good group.
Yeah, good questions. You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it. If there's anything else you guys need, phone numbers, general info, email is on the screen. If you know who your sales rep is, you certainly can reach out to them. If not, email us on that info@aktion.com, and we'll get that person connected with you.
Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day to spend with us.
Appreciate it.